A building can outlive the nation it represents. Scattered across the world's capitals are diplomatic missions that have survived the complete collapse of the empires that built them. These are imperial legacy embassies, silent sentinels whose very existence continues to shape the lines on our modern maps. They are not mere relics, but active players in international relations, their status protected by centuries-old treaties that newer nations still feel bound to honor. By the end of this journey, you will see world politics through a new lens, understanding how a building's foundation can be as powerful as a treaty's signature. How is it possible for a diplomatic compound to represent a country that no longer exists? And what does this strange persistence tell us about the true nature of political power? The rules of diplomacy are written not just in ink, but in stone and mortar. What do you think gives a place its lasting power? This unique form of diplomatic existence is a direct challenge to our modern world of nation-states. We often think of countries as the primary actors on the global stage, but imperial legacy embassies operate on a different set of rules, one written in the ink of treaties signed by emperors and kings long since gone. Their power comes from a deep-seated principle of international law known as Pacta Sunt Servanda, a Latin phrase that simply means agreements must be kept. This idea is so fundamental that even a new government, born from revolution or the peaceful dissolution of an empire, often feels bound by the promises of its predecessor. It is a powerful form of political inertia. The land these embassies occupy is not just real estate, it is a piece of sovereign territory frozen in time, a legal island whose status was settled centuries ago. To revoke that status would be to unravel a thread in the very fabric of international order. So a building, originally constructed to represent the power of an emperor, now represents the enduring power of a promise. How can a simple piece of paper hold such sway over modern borders? The answer lies not in the document itself, but in the unspoken agreement that some foundations are too deep to disturb. That unspoken agreement rests on a powerful legal fiction known as extraterritoriality. Think of it not as a physical wall, but as an invisible bubble of sovereignty. The ground beneath an embassy is treated, for all legal purposes, as if it were a small piece of the country it represents. This is why local police cannot simply walk in, and why the laws of the host nation do not fully apply within its gates. The concept is ancient, but it was powerfully solidified by gatherings like the Congress of Vienna in the early 19th century, which established clear rules for the diplomatic game. This principle creates a profound form of inertia. Even when the empire that built the embassy vanishes from the map, the host country often continues to honor this special status. The reasoning is deeply practical. If one nation were to seize a former empire's embassy, what would stop other countries from doing the same to its own diplomatic missions abroad? It is a game of diplomatic reciprocity where respecting the past ensures security for the future. So you have this remarkable situation. A building conceived in one era continues to operate under rules written for a world that has long since passed. Its legal identity is frozen like a fly in amber, representing a political entity that exists only in history books. This resilience is not about the strength of the building's walls, but about the enduring strength of a protocol so fundamental that to break it would be to risk unraveling the entire delicate tapestry of international relations. How can a mere idea, a fiction, hold such tangible power over the very soil of a modern city? To grasp the true power of these diplomatic ghosts, we must look at a living paradox, a sovereign entity that exists almost entirely through recognition. The Sovereign Military Order of Malta holds the unique title of a sovereign subject of international law, yet it governs not a single acre of land in the traditional sense. Its entire territory consists of two buildings in the heart of Rome, the Magistral Palace and the Villa del Priorato di Malta. Italy treats these properties as foreign soil, honoring the extraterritorial status granted in a treaty from the 19th century. This means that on a small patch of Italian land, the order operates with the full authority of a state. It issues its own passports, which are recognized for diplomatic travel. It maintains formal diplomatic relations with over 100 countries, exchanging ambassadors and engaging in international aid work. How can an organization without borders function as a country? The answer lies in a history that stretches back nearly 1,000 years. The order began as a monastic brotherhood caring for pilgrims in Jerusalem, evolving into a powerful military force during the Crusades. For centuries, it ruled the island of Malta as a sovereign kingdom. When Napoleon's forces expelled the order from Malta in the late 1700s, it lost its physical territory but not its sovereign status. The nations of Europe continued to recognize the order as an independent entity, a courtesy rooted in its long history and charitable mission. This recognition became its new territory. Its continued existence demonstrates that statehood can be a matter of consensus, a collective agreement that an entity's historical and legal identity is too significant to let fade away. The order's palazzos in Rome are more than just offices. They are the physical anchor for a state built on diplomacy and memory. This raises a profound question about the nature of power itself. If a state can survive for centuries without land, what does that tell us about the real foundations of political authority in our modern world? This concept of a state built on memory finds a powerful echo in the physical landscape of Istanbul. The grand embassies lining its historic districts are monuments to a different kind of legacy, one born from the slow decline of a once mighty empire. The Ottoman Empire, in its later centuries, found itself pressured into a series of agreements known as the Capitulations. These were not surrenders in a military sense, but rather sweeping concessions that granted European nations extraordinary privileges within Ottoman borders. Foreign citizens were exempt from local taxes and were tried in their own consular courts, creating a state within a state. It was a system that profoundly limited Ottoman sovereignty. When the empire finally collapsed after the First World War, the new Republic of Turkey moved decisively to abolish these humiliating treaties, asserting its full independence. Yet the physical evidence of that era remained, carved into the very hillsides of the city. The sprawling British Embassy Palace, the imposing French compound, these were not just buildings. They were constructed on land parcels explicitly granted under the terms of the old capitulations. Their formidable presence, therefore, carries a dual meaning. They are active diplomatic posts for modern nations, but they are also permanent landmarks of a time when foreign influence reached deep into the empire's core. For the Turkish Republic, these embassies are a sensitive and unavoidable part of the city's fabric. They are a daily reminder of a past that the nation worked hard to leave behind, yet their legal status, rooted in those old agreements, has been largely respected. This creates a fascinating tension between the desire to move forward and the weight of historical precedent. How does a modern nation reconcile with the architectural ghosts of its imperial past? The answer lies not in tearing them down, but in navigating the complex diplomatic waters they represent, a testament to the fact that the end of an empire does not automatically erase the footprints it left behind. This reversal of the embassy's purpose finds its ultimate expression just a short distance from the Order of Malta's own sovereign buildings. The Vatican City itself stands as the world's most profound example of a religious embassy that transformed into a sovereign state. For nearly 60 years after the unification of Italy in 1870, the Pope remained a self-declared prisoner within the Vatican walls, his temporal power stripped away by the new Italian kingdom. This period, known as the Roman Question, created an impossible diplomatic stalemate. The Pope was a global spiritual leader without a state, and Italy was a nation with a deeply conflicted relationship with the Church at its very heart. The resolution came not from war, but from a remarkable treaty. In 1929, Benito Mussolini's government and Cardinal Pietro Gasparri, representing the Holy See, signed the Lateran Pact. This agreement did something extraordinary. It created the independent state of Vatican City, the smallest country in the world, granting the Pope full sovereignty over its 44 hectares. But the treaty went even further, bestowing extraterritorial status upon several major basilicas and other ecclesiastical buildings scattered across Rome. This meant that properties like the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, the Pope's cathedral as the Bishop of Rome, were legally considered non-Italian soil. In a single diplomatic move, the Pope's historical seat was no longer just an embassy within Italy. It became a state, and his key churches abroad became extensions of that new sovereignty. The Vatican's creation demonstrates with stunning clarity how a persistent diplomatic and religious presence can, when historical forces align, crystallize into an entirely new form of sovereignty. It permanently altered the map of Rome, proving that statehood can be negotiated into existence, born from the unresolved legacy of a fallen temporal power. If an embassy can become a state, what does that suggest about the fluid nature of the borders we often assume are fixed forever? The British Embassy in Dublin is a fortress of memory. It stands not on a grand boulevard, but on a quiet, heavily guarded road, its presence a constant, low hum of a history that is anything but quiet. The land it occupies is not a relic from a vanished empire, for the United Kingdom is very much a present-day reality. Yet, the embassy's story is deeply entangled with the imperial past, making it a powerful case study in how collective memory can shape a diplomatic mission as forcefully as any legal treaty. The relationship between Britain and Ireland is one of the most complex in Europe, marked by centuries of domination, rebellion, and a painful struggle for independence. This history does not live in archives alone. It lives in the very atmosphere surrounding the embassy compound. For the Irish state, the embassy represents a necessary partner in a modern, interconnected Europe. For many Irish citizens, however, its imposing security barriers and watchful presence are a daily reminder of a colonial past that is still within living memory for some. This creates a unique and continuous negotiation. The embassy's primary function is to facilitate dialogue and cooperation between two neighboring states, but it must perform this role while being intensely aware of the symbolic weight it carries. Its security protocols are among the most stringent of any British mission worldwide, not because of a present-day threat from the Irish government, but because the building itself can become a target for those who see it not as a diplomatic office, but as the last local outpost of a former occupying power. This situation reveals a crucial nuance. The influence of history on an embassy is not always a matter of dusty parchment and the principle of Pacta sunt servanda. Sometimes it is the weight of unresolved grief, of national stories that are still being told and retold. The British Embassy in Dublin operates under the shadow of this collective memory. Every gesture, every statement, every interaction is filtered through this lens. To be effective, its diplomats must navigate a landscape where the past is always present, where a routine meeting is never just a routine meeting. It demonstrates that the true challenge of a legacy embassy is not always about upholding the legal fiction of a dead empire, but about managing the very real and living emotions that its stone and mortar provoke. If a building can be a symbol of a painful history, can it also, over time, become a bridge to a new understanding? Yet even the most powerful memory requires a modern legal framework to endure. The year 1961 marked a pivotal moment in this story, when nations gathered in Vienna to create a universal rulebook for diplomacy. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations did something remarkable. It took centuries of unwritten customs and ad hoc agreements and distilled them into a single, binding international treaty. For legacy embassies, this was not just a codification, it was a lifeline. The convention explicitly affirmed the principle of the inviolability of diplomatic premises, meaning the host country must protect the embassy from any intrusion or damage. It also guaranteed the absolute immunity of diplomats from local laws. By establishing these rules as global standards, the convention provided a new, modern legitimacy to arrangements that had originated in the courts of emperors. A successor state born from revolution or independence could now point to this universally accepted treaty as the reason for honoring an old empire's embassy. It was no longer just about respecting the ghosts of the past, it was about adhering to the norms of the present global community. The convention effectively locked the status quo in place, creating a safety net that allowed these historical anomalies to persist without constant renegotiation. It transformed a collection of fragile historical claims into a robust, internationally sanctioned system. How does a rule written in the 20th century protect a building from the 18th? By making the exception the rule, turning diplomatic peculiarities into universal principles, this global agreement ensures that the silent sentinels of fallen empires can continue their watch, their strange existence now guaranteed by the very order that replaced them. But this transfer of diplomatic power is never a simple matter of changing a nameplate. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 presented the world with an unprecedented puzzle. A superpower vanished overnight, leaving behind a vast network of embassies and consulates across the globe. Who had the right to these properties? The answer was not found in a will, but in a complex political negotiation. The Russian Federation, under its first president, Boris Yeltsin, was widely accepted by the international community as the continuator state. This was a crucial legal and diplomatic designation. It meant that Russia was not a brand new country, but the primary successor to the Soviet Union, inheriting its seat on the United Nations Security Council, its foreign debt, and its sprawling portfolio of overseas real estate. The iconic Soviet embassy on 16th Street in Washington, D.C., a massive complex that had been a symbol of Cold War tension, suddenly became the Russian embassy. The transition appeared seamless from the outside, but it was underpinned by a critical act of recognition from the United States and other host nations. They had to agree that Russia was the rightful heir. This was not just about property rights, it was about stabilizing the international system during a moment of profound upheaval. Granting Russia the continuator status was a way to ensure that nuclear arsenals, treaty obligations, and diplomatic channels remained under a recognized authority. It was a pragmatic choice to maintain order, yet this process also created a stark disparity. While Russia inherited a ready-made global presence, the 14 other newly independent republics, from Ukraine to Kazakhstan, found themselves starting from zero. They had to acquire land, construct buildings, or lease office space, a massive financial and logistical burden for fledgling nations. This inheritance of embassies was far more than a real estate transaction. It was a powerful signal to the world about which fragment of the old empire would carry forward its international identity. The Russian flag flying over the former Soviet compound sent a clear message that despite the revolutionary change, a thread of statehood had been preserved. How much of a nation's power, then, is tied not to its territory, but to its recognized place in the global diplomatic community? Long before its palazzos in Rome, the Knights of St. John held an island fortress. For more than 2 centuries, Rhodes was not just their home, it was their sovereign kingdom. They minted their own coins, governed a diverse population, and defended their shores with a powerful navy. This was a state in the fullest sense of the word, a territorial power projecting its influence across the Mediterranean. Then, in 1522, the walls finally fell. After a brutal siege, the knights were forced to surrender Rhodes to the vast Ottoman Empire. They departed with honor, but they left their land behind. This moment could have been the end. Instead, it became the defining test of their sovereignty. Stripped of their territory, did their statehood simply vanish? The knights themselves argued it did not. They had lost the ground beneath their feet, but they retained something perhaps more powerful, their recognized identity. The monarchs of Europe continued to treat the order as a sovereign entity in exile. This acceptance was the lifeblood that sustained them. For 7 years, they were a state without a state, a government without land, until the Holy Roman Emperor granted them the island of Malta as a new base. Their journey demonstrates a radical idea that sovereignty can exist as a purely diplomatic reality, sustained by the collective agreement of other powers. It is the ultimate adaptation. When you can no longer rule a territory, you learn to master the art of recognition. How does an institution survive the complete loss of its physical foundation? By ensuring that its name, its history, and its legal standing become its most valuable assets, assets that cannot be conquered or seized. This flexibility is the hallmark of those rare entities that manage to outlive the empires that once surrounded them. The stone and marble of these embassy walls were never meant to be neutral. They were conceived as weapons of perception, designed to project an image of unshakable power long before a single diplomat uttered a word. An empire would pour immense resources into constructing a mission that was less an office and more a fortress palace, a deliberate statement carved in granite. The former Austro-Hungarian embassy in Istanbul, now the Consulate General of Italy, stands as a perfect example. It is a colossal structure, a sprawling compound with ornate facades that dominates its surroundings. Its design whispers and sometimes shouts a simple message: we are here and we are not leaving. This was architecture as psychological warfare, intended to awe the local population and signal to rival empires that this nation had a permanent, formidable stake in the region's future. The investment was strategic. A building this grand, this expensive, becomes a sunk cost of prestige. It is far more than a piece of property, it is a landmark. And landmarks, by their very nature, are difficult to erase. This creates a fascinating dynamic in the modern era. When a negotiator from a new republic sits across from a diplomat in a cavernous room built for an imperial ambassador, the negotiation is not happening on a level playing field. The very space itself, the high ceilings, the echoing halls, the weight of history in the masonry, becomes a silent participant in the discussion. It subtly reinforces the enduring influence of the arrangement that brought the building into existence. The architecture argues for the permanence of the original treaty, making any suggestion of revocation seem not just diplomatically risky, but almost physically implausible. How do you argue against a foundation that has stood for 200 years? The building itself becomes the most compelling advocate for the status quo, a permanent reminder that some political facts are quite literally set in stone. That silent advocacy of stone and mortar translates directly into a powerful force on the modern geopolitical chessboard. A legacy embassy is far more than a historical artifact. It is an active constraint on contemporary action. Imagine a nation engaged in a tense border dispute with a neighbor. It might be tempted to seize or threaten a diplomatic mission belonging to its rival, using it as leverage. But if that same nation is the host to a legacy embassy from a former empire, its hands are suddenly tied. Any aggressive move it makes could be used as a precedent by other countries, potentially jeopardizing the status of its own embassies abroad. This creates a hidden layer of diplomatic restraint, an unspoken rule that protects these old compounds. The host country becomes a guardian of the very system that limits its own options. This is the paradox of reciprocity in action, a self-imposed check on power born from the need for global stability. The legacy embassy, therefore, acts as a permanent anchor, preventing diplomatic relations from descending into a chaotic free-for-all where missions are treated as pawns in every new conflict. Its continued presence ensures that even the most bitter modern disputes are fought within a framework of rules written for a different age. But this stabilizing influence has another, more contentious side. In post-colonial relationships, the embassy of a former imperial power can become a powerful symbolic wound. Its grand facade is a daily reminder of a history of domination. A new government, eager to assert its full sovereignty, might see the embassy not as a protected diplomatic space, but as the last piece of foreign territory on its soil. This gives the host nation a subtle form of leverage. While it may never seriously consider violating the embassy's status, it can use the building's symbolic weight as a bargaining chip in wider negotiations. A discussion about trade tariffs or security cooperation might be influenced by the unspoken question of the embassy's future. The former imperial power, aware of this sensitivity, may find itself making concessions in other areas to ensure its diplomatic mission remains undisturbed. The building itself becomes a permanent, silent participant in the relationship, a physical manifestation of a shared, often painful, history that both sides must continually navigate. This complex dance demonstrates that the true power of a legacy embassy lies not just in the law, but in the potent and often unspoken emotions it evokes. The grand architecture of these compounds is never silent. Beyond their legal shields and diplomatic immunity, they engage in a subtler, more pervasive form of influence. This is the realm of soft power, the ability to shape preferences and build affinity not through coercion but through attraction. A legacy embassy transforms from a fortress of sovereignty into a vibrant cultural salon. Its gates open for art exhibitions that showcase a nation's contemporary creativity, not just its imperial past. Its halls resonate with language classes, where a new generation learns the tongue of the former power not as a colonial imposition, but as a key to global opportunity. It hosts academic seminars, film festivals, and culinary events, creating a continuous, living dialogue between the host society and the culture of the successor state. This ongoing engagement reframes the entire relationship. The connection is no longer trapped in the bitter pages of history books, but is renewed daily through positive, voluntary interactions. A young student attending a concert at the French Institute in a former colony does not experience it as a reminder of domination, but as an access point to a wider cultural world. This is the genius of soft power. It disarms criticism by offering value. It builds bridges where walls once stood. The embassy becomes a friendly face, a generous neighbor, and a trusted partner. This cultural presence, maintained over decades, weaves the successor state into the very social fabric of the host nation. Its influence becomes ambient, a background hum of familiarity and goodwill that can prove far more resilient than any treaty. When a relationship is built on shared appreciation for art, education, and innovation, it becomes incredibly difficult to sever. The soft power cultivated within those old walls ensures that the voice of the former empire, now a modern nation, continues to be heard not as an echo from the past, but as a relevant and welcome contributor to the present. That cultural influence is built upon a foundation of immense material value. The land these embassies occupy is not just historically significant, it is astronomically expensive. Think of the most exclusive neighborhoods in London, Paris, or Tokyo. Now imagine owning a full city block there, not just a building, but the very ground it stands on, and paying absolutely nothing in property taxes forever. This is the staggering economic reality of imperial legacy embassies. For the successor state, it is a perpetual windfall, a gift that keeps on giving from a government that no longer exists. They inherit a ready-made, prime-location diplomatic compound without spending a single dollar on acquisition. The savings are monumental. For the host country, however, the equation is reversed. That same parcel of land represents a permanent hole in the city's tax base. It is prime real estate, potentially worth billions, that generates no revenue for local services like schools, roads, or police. Instead, it is a sovereign concession, a piece of the capital's heart that officially belongs to another nation. This transforms the embassy from a purely diplomatic entity into a colossal financial asset. Any discussion about its status is no longer just a conversation about history or international law. It is a multi-billion-dollar real estate negotiation. The host nation must weigh the diplomatic fallout of challenging the status quo against the tangible economic benefit of reclaiming that land. But the cost of such a move would be incalculable, risking reciprocal actions against its own missions abroad. So the arrangement persists, a testament to the fact that the most powerful treaties are often those backed by the undeniable weight of economic inertia. The ground beneath these silent sentinels is valuable in every sense of the word, making their continued presence one of the most expensive and enduring subsidies in modern international relations. This legal shield, however, casts a long and sometimes troubling shadow. The same principle of extraterritoriality that preserves these diplomatic islands can also create zones of impunity. There have been instances where serious crimes, from financial fraud to allegations of abuse, are said to have occurred within an embassy's walls. Because local police have no jurisdiction to enter and investigate, these accusations can languish in a legal limbo, never reaching a court of law in the host country. This creates a profound friction, pitting the ancient rules of diplomatic inviolability against the modern demand for justice and accountability. For the citizens living nearby, a mission meant to represent a foreign nation can begin to feel like a lawless enclave, a place where the normal rules simply do not apply. This tension is a constant test for diplomats, who must balance their protected status with the ethical imperative to cooperate with host authorities, lest their privilege erodes the very goodwill their mission is supposed to build. Beyond legal disputes, the physical presence of a legacy embassy can become a powerful magnet for political anger. That flag flying over a prime piece of urban real estate is not a neutral symbol for everyone. For groups protesting the policies of the former imperial power, or for nationalist movements seeking to erase all symbols of a colonial past, the embassy offers a perfect stationary target. Its grand facade, once meant to project unassailable power, can become a backdrop for demonstrations, a place where historical grievances are loudly aired. The embassy compound, designed as a fortress, must then function as one. Its security measures a visible reminder of the unresolved tensions it embodies. This transforms the diplomat's role from pure representation to that of a perpetual manager of symbolic conflict. Their work involves not just bilateral relations with the government, but also navigating the volatile currents of public opinion in the streets outside their gates. The survival of these institutions is therefore never guaranteed. It is a delicate equilibrium maintained through unceasing and often invisible diplomatic effort. Host governments must walk a fine line, honoring their international obligations while responding to the legitimate frustrations of their own people. A single misstep, a controversial incident left unresolved, can inflame sentiments and threaten the fragile understanding that has allowed the embassy to stand for so long. The very fact that these missions have persisted through revolutions and the fall of empires is a testament not to the strength of their walls, but to the enduring, if precarious, power of diplomatic negotiation. Their continued presence is a daily choice, a quiet agreement that the cost of disrupting this ancient system is still greater than the cost of upholding it, shadows and all. The future of these diplomatic islands is far from guaranteed. As the 21st century unfolds, the very foundations of the international system that protects them are being tested. Globalization has created a world where borders feel more permeable, where corporations and digital networks wield influence that sometimes rivals that of nations. In this new landscape, the idea of a small, sovereign patch of land in a foreign capital can seem like an archaic concept, a relic from a time when power was strictly territorial. Why maintain such an expensive, tangible symbol when diplomacy can be conducted through secure video links and instant messages? The digital age presents the most direct challenge to the legacy embassy's purpose. If the core function of diplomacy is communication, and communication is now instantaneous and virtual, then the argument for preserving vast compounds on priceless urban land grows weaker with every technological advance. A nation could theoretically manage its foreign relations from a single, centralized headquarters, rendering its global network of physical missions redundant. This is not just a theoretical possibility. Many consular services, like visa applications, have already moved online. The pressure to reduce costs and increase efficiency will inevitably lead to questions about the necessity of maintaining every single diplomatic post, especially those inherited from a bygone era. The first embassies to be scrutinized in any budget review might well be the oldest ones, whose historical value is not always matched by their contemporary strategic importance. Could the very technology that connects the world ultimately lead to the dissolution of its most enduring diplomatic landmarks? Yet, against this tide of digital disruption, a countervailing force is gathering strength. Rising nationalism in many countries encourages a renewed focus on sovereignty and a critical re-examination of historical agreements. A legacy embassy, particularly one from a former colonial power, can become a potent symbol in this new political climate. For a populist leader seeking to rally support, what better target than a grand building on prime real estate that represents a humiliating chapter in the nation's past? The argument is simple and emotionally powerful. Why should we continue to honor a treaty signed by a king who oppressed our ancestors? Why should a foreign power enjoy tax-free ownership of land that could be used for schools or hospitals for our people? This sentiment challenges the principle of Pacta Sunt Servanda. Agreements must be kept with a more visceral principle, the right to reclaim one's own story and space. The diplomatic cost of such a move would be high, but for a government prioritizing domestic sentiment over international goodwill, it might be a price worth paying. The survival of these embassies, therefore, may depend less on international law and more on the delicate balance of politics within the host nation itself. Will a future generation see these compounds as respected institutions or as overdue reparations? Paradoxically, the same forces of instability that threaten these embassies could also be their salvation. In an increasingly turbulent and unpredictable world, the value of stability skyrockets. These legacy compounds are among the most stable fixtures in international relations. Their continued presence, governed by rules that have survived world wars and the rise and fall of ideologies, offers a rare point of certainty. They become anchors, not just for the countries they represent, but for the entire diplomatic community. In a time of crisis, when digital networks are vulnerable to cyber attacks or political manipulation, the physical embassy provides a secure, reliable channel for communication. Its walls offer a neutral space for secret negotiations, a place where adversaries can meet face to face away from the glare of the media. The trust built within those rooms over decades, sometimes centuries, is an intangible asset that cannot be replicated online. The future may not be a choice between physical presence and digital diplomacy, but a blend of both, where the legacy embassy serves as the hardened, secure hub for a sprawling digital network. Its greatest role in the coming century might be to provide a sanctuary of old-world stability in a new world of chaos. The ultimate test will be whether the world decides that some foundations, however ancient, are too solid to replace. Yet within the world of diplomacy, not all missions are created equal. The distinction between an embassy and a consulate is crucial, a difference that defines their very purpose and power. An embassy is the political heart of a nation's presence abroad. You will almost always find it in the capital city, a physical representation of one government speaking directly to another. It is led by an ambassador, the personal representative of their head of state, and its core function is high-level diplomacy, negotiating treaties, and conveying official policy. A consulate, by contrast, is the practical hand. Located in major commercial centers like Istanbul or Mumbai, its focus is on people, not politics. Consulates issue visas, renew passports, assist citizens in distress, and promote trade. Think of it this way: if the embassy is the boardroom where national strategies are discussed, the consulate is the help desk and business office rolled into one. Both enjoy diplomatic privileges, but the embassy's status is fundamentally more elevated and symbolic. Its inviolability is sacrosanct, its connection to state sovereignty absolute. This is why the legacy we are exploring almost always attaches to embassies. They are the symbolic hearts of diplomatic missions, the compounds built to project imperial power for centuries to come. Their enduring presence carries a weight that a consulate, for all its importance, simply does not bear. They are the crown jewels of a nation's diplomatic network, and it is their fate that becomes entangled with the rise and fall of empires. But the ultimate test of this diplomatic endurance is not found in the past. It is happening now, in the quiet work of offices that cannot officially be called embassies. These are the missions of unrecognized states, entities like the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic in Western Sahara or the Republic of China, which governs the island of Taiwan. They exist in a perpetual state of diplomatic limbo, a gray zone that reveals the raw struggle for legitimacy. Their offices in foreign capitals are not protected by the full weight of the Vienna Convention. They cannot fly their national flag with the same legal assurance, and their representatives do not enjoy absolute immunity. Instead, they operate under names like Representative Office or Cultural Institute, a necessary fiction that allows a semblance of dialogue without forcing host countries to formally acknowledge a contested sovereignty. This delicate dance is the modern mirror of what the legacy embassies of fallen empires must have endured in their earliest, most vulnerable days, Before custom and treaty cemented their status, they too were precarious ventures, their survival dependent on the delicate and often unspoken consent of their hosts. Every handshake, every meeting held in a neutral location, was a small victory in the long campaign for acceptance. The representative office of an unrecognized state today faces that same uphill battle. Its power comes not from law but from persistence. Its continued operation is a daily argument for its own existence, a quiet but firm statement that it will not simply fade away. This modern struggle throws into sharp relief the incredible achievement of those historical missions that successfully made the transition from provisional outpost to permanent institution. It shows us that the journey from a contested claim to an accepted fact on the ground is paved with relentless diplomatic effort. How many handshakes does it take to build a foundation as solid as stone? This international consensus, however, requires a stage. The principles that protect legacy embassies do not exist in a vacuum. They are nurtured and reinforced within the halls of global institutions like the United Nations. While the UN would never hold a session to debate the fate of a single building in Rome or Istanbul, its very existence provides the essential framework that makes such anomalies possible. By enshrining the principles of sovereign equality and the inviolability of diplomatic relations in its founding charter, the UN creates a protective umbrella for all diplomatic missions, regardless of their origin. It transforms what was once a collection of bilateral courtesies into a universal standard of behavior. This global forum gives every nation, even the smallest, a voice to affirm or challenge the rules of the diplomatic game. When a new state is admitted to the United Nations, its membership is more than a symbolic welcome. It is a powerful act of collective recognition. This recognition has direct consequences for the world of legacy embassies. A country accepted into the UN fold is far more likely to be acknowledged as the legitimate heir to a former empire's diplomatic properties. The international community, speaking through the General Assembly, effectively bestows a seal of approval that can solidify a shaky claim. The UN itself becomes the ultimate arbiter of political legitimacy, its membership roster acting as the closest thing the world has to an official registry of states. This process demonstrates that the survival of these diplomatic ghosts is not merely a matter between two countries, but a decision made by the entire community of nations. How does a building survive the empire that built it? By having its existence tacitly endorsed in New York, by the quiet, continuous work of global diplomacy that affirms some arrangements are simply too fundamental to undo. These silent stone structures are far more than functional offices. They are potent psychological anchors, projecting an image of unbroken continuity for the nations that now occupy them. For the Russian Federation, the monumental embassy complexes it inherited from the Soviet Union are not just convenient real estate. They are physical proof of a lineage that stretches back through the Tsars, a tangible connection to a history of great power status. Walking the halls of the old Soviet embassy in a foreign capital, a Russian diplomat is surrounded by the ghosts of superpower negotiations, a constant reminder that their country has always been and remains a central actor on the world stage. The building itself becomes an argument for permanence, its sheer scale and prime location whispering that this nation's influence is a geographical fact, not a temporary political condition. This dynamic works in reverse for the host country. The same building that signifies endurance for one nation can represent something far more complex for the people who live around it. A grand imperial embassy is a daily, unavoidable part of the urban landscape. For some, it might be a point of pride, a symbol that their capital is important enough to host such a significant mission, a testament to their own nation's diplomatic tradition. For others, that very same facade can feel like a permanent scratch on the city's soul, a prickly reminder of a time when their ancestors had little say over what happened within their own borders. The building does not change, but the emotions it evokes are entirely dependent on which side of its walls you stand. It becomes a Rorschach test in stone and marble, revealing a nation's unresolved feelings about its own past. The sovereign military order of Malta offers perhaps the purest example of this symbolic power. Its two sovereign properties in Rome are not just its headquarters, they are the entire territory of its statehood. These palaces are the ultimate proof of its unparalleled historical resilience. Having lost its island kingdom centuries ago, the order's continued existence hinges on the global recognition that its sovereign identity did not vanish with its land. The palaces are the physical embodiment of that recognition. They are a monument to the idea that an institution can be so deeply woven into the fabric of international history that its right to exist becomes undeniable, even without an army or a traditional territory. The buildings are not just characters in the story of international relations, they are the story. Their endurance through revolutions, wars, and the complete transformation of Europe is a silent, daily argument for the power of memory and precedent. What does it mean for a building to carry the entire weight of a nation's identity? It means that diplomacy is fought not only with words and treaties, but with the powerful, silent language of permanence. That perpetual upkeep is a silent but staggering line item in a nation's budget. These are not modern office blocks with standard maintenance schedules. They are historic palaces, sprawling compounds with aging electrical systems, fragile period plasterwork, and roofs that cover tens of thousands of square feet. Every repair is a conservation project, requiring artisans skilled in century-old techniques and materials that are no longer mass-produced. Replacing a single window in a 19th century embassy might involve custom hand-blown glass and meticulously matched timber, a process costing thousands of dollars for just one pane, multiplied across hundreds of windows. The choice facing the successor state is constant and expensive. Do they install modern, energy-efficient climate control to keep their diplomats comfortable, potentially compromising the building's historical integrity? Or do they preserve the original, inefficient systems at a monumental cost in utilities and upkeep? This is the hidden burden of inheritance. The grand embassy that cost their imperial predecessors nothing to acquire now demands a king's ransom simply to maintain. It forces a modern government to act as both a foreign ministry and a historical preservation society, balancing the urgent needs of today's diplomacy against the solemn duty of being a custodian for yesterday's architecture. This financial commitment, renewed with every leaking pipe and cracked stone, is the most tangible measure of how much a country truly values the soft power these buildings generate. Is the prestige of occupying a landmark worth the millions it drains from the diplomatic budget each year? For the nations that choose to pay, the answer is a resounding yes. They are investing not in real estate, but in a narrative of unbroken influence, a story written in stone and paid for in gold. Beneath the polished surface of cultural salons and diplomatic receptions lies the embassy's oldest and most shadowy function. These compounds were never designed to be just friendly neighbors. They are the forward operating bases for the quiet, ceaseless work of intelligence gathering. A legacy embassy, with its roots sunk deep into the host country's soil, possesses an intelligence advantage that a newly built mission can only dream of. Its very architecture often conceals a hidden history. Within secure basements and behind locked doors, generations of diplomats have compiled archives, cultivated sources, and filed reports that create an unparalleled institutional memory. The knowledge of local power structures, of family connections that stretch back generations, of the unspoken rules that govern society, this is intelligence that cannot be downloaded from a satellite. It is passed down in whispers and memos from one embassy official to the next, a cumulative understanding of the nation they are stationed within. This deep historical knowledge makes a legacy embassy an incredibly effective listening post. Its staff can read the local newspapers not just for the headlines, but for the subtle shifts in tone that signal a coming political storm. They have contacts whose families they have known for decades, sources of information built on trust that was earned over a lifetime, not a single meeting. While drones and signals intelligence now provide a God's eye view, the embassy remains the irreplaceable source of human intelligence, the kind that explains not just what is happening, but why it is happening and what might happen next. This darker function is an inseparable part of their history, a sobering reminder that behind the elegant facades, the hard, often ruthless business of statecraft and information warfare has always been conducted within those walls. Yet the story of these diplomatic ghosts is not a uniquely European phenomenon. To truly grasp the global picture, we must turn our gaze eastward, where the legacies of empire unfolded on a vastly different stage. The great Asian empires, from the Qing dynasty in China to the Meiji Restoration in Japan, also engaged in complex diplomatic dances, but the outcomes for their foreign missions tell a strikingly different tale. The most defining feature in Asia was not the grand embassy in a capital city, but the sprawling network of treaty ports. Following the Opium Wars of the 19th century, Western powers forced China into a series of unequal treaties. These agreements did not just grant diplomatic immunity, they carved out entire sections of major Chinese cities like Shanghai and Tianjin as sovereign foreign concessions. Here, British, French, and American authorities administered their own laws, ran their own police forces, and flew their own flags. These were not isolated diplomatic compounds, they were colonies within a city, blatant symbols of a humiliated sovereignty. When the colonial era finally ended, the reaction across much of Asia was not one of gradual absorption, but of decisive, often fervent rejection. For new nations like the People's Republic of China, the treaty ports were not historical artifacts to be managed. They were open wounds on the national body that needed to be excised. The process was swift and absolute. The foreign concessions were reclaimed, the extraterritorial privileges abolished, and the physical architecture of that era was either repurposed or, in some cases, razed. This stands in stark contrast to the European experience, where a former imperial embassy might be grudgingly tolerated as a necessary part of the diplomatic landscape. Why such a dramatic difference in outcome? The answer lies in the nature of the imperial encounter itself. In Europe, empires often crumbled from within or through wars between relative equals, leading to a messy inheritance among nations that shared a long, intertwined history. In Asia, the imperial imposition was often seen as a more direct and recent foreign domination, creating a national narrative centered on liberation and a powerful desire to erase all visible reminders of subjugation. The contrast reveals a profound truth about how nations heal. Some choose to live alongside the architectural ghosts of their past, no matter how uncomfortable, weaving them into a complex tapestry of memory. Others find their strength in a clean break, believing that true sovereignty requires a landscape purged of the symbols that once denied it. This divergence forces us to ask which approach offers a more stable foundation for the future. Is it the European model of layered history, where every stone tells a contested story, or the Asian model of a decisive reset, where the ground itself is made new? The answer may determine not just the fate of old buildings, but the very character of international relations for centuries to come. The ground beneath a city is a record of its political soul. Legacy embassy districts do not simply occupy space in a capital, they actively sculpt it, imposing a permanent international geography onto the national map. Walk through the old diplomatic quarters of Istanbul, and you are traversing a living archaeological site. The wide boulevards were not laid out for modern traffic, but to accommodate the grand carriages of 19th-century ambassadors. The imposing walls of the foreign compounds dictated the flow of neighborhoods, creating zones of quiet exclusion amidst the city's vibrant chaos. This urban fabric is a palimpsest where each layer of paint conceals the faded script of empires. The city must constantly adapt to these frozen islands of sovereignty, rerouting entire transit systems to avoid sensitive perimeters and enacting height restrictions to protect diplomatic sightlines. A mayor's plan for a new subway line can be fundamentally altered by the need to skirt a 200-year-old treaty obligation. The economic impact is equally profound. The presence of these missions creates a halo effect, attracting luxury hotels, high-end restaurants, and security firms that cater to the diplomatic community. This injects wealth into the local economy, but it also drives up property values, subtly reshaping the social character of entire districts. The relationship is a complex dance of dependence and resentment. The city benefits from the prestige and economic activity, yet it must forever defer to the unique legal status of these foreign enclaves. This creates a form of cosmopolitanism that is deeply historical, not the result of recent globalization, but a lingering artifact of the age of empires. The identity of the capital becomes inseparable from these diplomatic ghosts, a daily reminder that within its heart beat the sovereign pulses of other nations. The quiet dignity of an embassy's walls can be shattered in a courtroom when the abstract principle of diplomatic immunity meets a concrete legal dispute. The result is a landmark ruling that echoes for generations. These are not dry legal proceedings, they are high-stakes dramas where the fate of a single building can redefine the rules for every diplomatic mission on the planet. The case of the Philippine Embassy in the United States serves as a perfect example. For years, a group of Filipino nationals who had worked at the embassy sued the Philippine government in American courts, alleging they were paid below the local minimum wage. The embassy's defense rested entirely on the principle of sovereign immunity, the idea that one country cannot be sued in the courts of another without its consent. The case wound its way through the American legal system, forcing judges to answer a difficult question. Does a diplomatic mission's immunity extend to shielding it from all labor laws, even those protecting the most basic rights of its own employees? The final ruling was a nuanced but powerful precedent. While the embassy itself was protected from seizure, the court found that its commercial activities, including the employment of local staff, were not entirely above the law. This created a new boundary, a legal fence around the concept of immunity. It clarified that while the diplomatic core of a mission is sacrosanct, its peripheral operations exist in a grayer area, subject to greater scrutiny. This single case did not just affect the Philippines and the United States. It sent a signal to every nation hosting a foreign mission, providing a legal roadmap for how to challenge perceived abuses without violating the Vienna Convention. The slow accumulation of such cases, fought over decades in courtrooms from Europe to Asia, is what transforms ancient custom into binding international law. Each verdict is another brick in the foundation of the modern diplomatic system, a system whose stability was forged in the fires of legal conflict. How does a vague idea become an enforceable rule? Through the patient, often painful, process of litigation, where the strange persistence of legacy embassies provides the perfect test